This episode of Tim and Phil Talk About Games was recorded live at PAX Australia, where Phil, myself, and our good friend Megan Pusey presented the panel Videogames for Science. The panel was attended by an audience of almost 600 amazing people whose enthusiasm and support really made the event very special for the three of us. We would like to give a few quick shout-outs to everyone who attended, to the enforcers at PAX Australia who made the whole event run seamlessly, to Toby, the AV technician at the Melbourne Convention Entertainment Centre, for helping us record the panel and for getting the audio and visual stuff working so seamlessly. And also a very big special thank you to Thean, the enforcer assigned to our panel, who went out of his way at every step to ensure that our panel was the best experience it could possibly be for both us on the panel and for everyone in the audience. A quick heads up before we begin, the audio was recorded raw and unfiltered, so there are some times when the audio from the presentation overwhelms our voices, but I've done my best to try and make it as listenable, if not as enjoyable as possible. The panel will also be available on YouTube if you want to follow along with the video presentation as well, but for now, this is Videogames for Science at PAX Australia 2014.
Yes, it did.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to PAX 2014. We all having a great time?
Cool. Awesome.
That's a middling maybe. Thank you very much for coming to our panel, Video Games for Science, when there are so many other amazing things happening today. It really does mean a lot to us, and we hope we won't disappoint you.
Didn't expect so many of them.
No, there are a lot of you here, aren't there?
Packed out.
Wow.
It's amazing.
So, for science! And I saw we have at least one Portal cosplay here, so...
Actually, could all of the Portal cosplayers stand up? Just so we can see how many we got.
Well, Companion Cube, got at least...
3. Oh, yeah, that's good.
Nice.
All right, cool. Less than
Do we have any Kerbals?
We have
No Kerbals.
Well,
Very disappointing.
next year.
Next year.
All right.
They all crashed.
Too soon, yeah.
See, didn't you see the black dust on the floor?
Wow.
Anyway, so with no more further ado, let me please introduce the panel that we've got here today. First of all, on my right, we have Phil English.
Yep, my name is Phil. I work as an analytical scientist over in WA. Actually, we're all from WA, but we'll get into that. I completed my PhD in 2011 with the incredibly exciting title Structural Studies of Titanal and Zirconal Sulfate Hydrates. If anyone wants to talk to me about that, that'd be great. No one ever has. So
I've never asked him.
Well, all right, new best friend. More importantly to this panel, though, I've been a gamer since I was around about 4 years old. I first played an Amstrad CPC64, which, if you've been to the classic PC area, that's an Amstrad. It's not the same one as I had, but I was so excited to sit down and play with that. You can see the joy on my face there. But yeah, that's pretty much me. Over to Megan.
So I'm a high school science teacher at an all-girls school. That was me yesterday. And I'm going to be talking about using video games in the classroom. I started off as a science communicator, so I was looking at communicating science in unusual ways. And now I'm teaching, and so I'm trying to teach in unusual ways. And back to Tim.
And my name is Tim. I'm going to go through my bio in a little bit, but the basics of it is that I am a massive, massive gamer. I looked up my Steam stats just before the panel today to see if, let's put a funky Steam stat in, and then found out I have spent something like $5,000 on Steam games. But yeah, no, because it gets worse. Don't applaud that. This is the worst Alcoholics Anonymous ever. They're like, well done.
Oh, yeah.
You drank all that bourbon. That's
really something.
That's really something. I was like, it's okay. It's probably, I bought these things when they're on special. Like, this one I bought when it was $50 instead of $80, and it's telling me, it's like, no, it's $10, man. It's $10 now. So that's the uninflated price, which is even more terrifying. And then to find out that I've, spent over 3,500 hours in Steam games after my Steam stats got wiped 4 years ago. Which is really... And I know they got wiped because it no longer shows me as having spent 600 hours in Oblivion. So... I also have tattoos. My tattoos are all gaming tattoos. I have the Morrowind tattoo on my arm, and I became a cyborg earlier this year. I got my first implants. Got an NFC chip in my hand. I've got a rare earth magnet in my finger. I read magnetic fields down to about 1.8 nanotesla, which is pretty cool.
If you have an Android phone, come up to
Yeah,
it.
find me. If you find me somewhere on the floor later tomorrow or later tonight or whatever,
scan his
you can
hand.
scan my hand for fun stuff.
That didn't come out right. That didn't come out right.
We promised.
All right. Probably get started.
Yeah.
Enough about your hands.
We said last night, let's keep it PG, but that might not happen.
I tried. That wasn't even intentional.
It's about science, Tim.
It's science. It's all for science. It's okay.
All right. Okay, so as I said before, my name's Phil. My task today is to convince you all, although it seems like we're not going to need much convincing, that performing science, performing scientific experiments is actually quite similar to playing video games in the way that you think about it. So hands up who has any kind of idea what the scientific method is or knows it. Oh, yes! Brilliant, I don't have to explain anything. Okay, so for the 3 people that didn't know what that was. So the scientific method is a way of investigating the world around us. It consists of 4 main parts. The first part is a question, asking a question of the world. The second part, excuse my really badly sprited arrows. The second part is developing a hypothesis that might help illuminate that question. The third part is testing that hypothesis, designing tests to do that hypothesis. And the fourth is analysing the tests and getting some kind of feedback loop happening on your tests and hypotheses and figuring out what's going on. So it'll probably help, although with that show of hands, we don't need much help, but it's part of my PowerPoint. It'll probably help if we had an example to run through. So imagine that you are a hotshot materials researcher. It's a rock star life, but imagine you're a hot materials researcher and you have developed a ultra strong, ultra light material, and you think it's going to set the world on fire. You think it's going to replace aeroplane.
Not actually.
Not actually.
It would actually set the world on fire.
That would be something nuclear, I'm sure. So imagine that the first question that you're probably going to ask as a materials researcher is, how can I break this thing? Your hypothesis, because you're a materials researcher, you've been around the block a bit, might be that you can expect that it's going to be strong in response to some forces, but weak in response to other forces. With that in mind, you design some tests. This moves. Come on. All right. Again, excuse my amazing spriting, but I'm a scientist, not a spriter. So, all right. So your first test is that you pull on it. You test its tensile strength, and you're like, hell yeah, it's super strong. Can't possibly break it. It's amazing. So you move on to your second test. You smush it. That is the scientific term. Don't care. To test its compressive strength, unfortunately, in this case, it leads to total failure. The material buckles and breaks. So that sucks. Your dreams of rock god, materials researcher success have gone down the drain. But this is the way science works. You kind of iterate on things. You may be asking yourself, what does that have to do with gaming? Well, imagine instead that you are a gamer and you're playing some kind of adventure RPG or something like that. And you run up into a new monster or a boss or something like that. Usually the first question that you're going to ask, you pretty much go through the same process. You ask yourself a question, how am I going to defeat this boss? Your hypothesis, because you're a gamer, because you've been playing games all your life or whatever, since yesterday, is that it is going to be strong to certain things and weak to other things. So with that in mind, you perform some tests. It's pretty awesome.
Is that the PAX medal on your end?
Oh yeah, yep. So when you run into this monster, because he's blue, you might kind of already get an idea that maybe an ice lance isn't the best thing to do about it, but say you're like me and you don't know how to do things. So you try and freeze it with an ice lance, and it kind of shrugs off the attack. Nothing happens. So instead, next time your turn comes around, you take a bit of damage, you cast a fireball at its chest, and it's a critical hit, boss catches fire, and explodes. So, really easy game. So yeah, you can kind of see that when you're playing a video game and you're comparing that to the scientific method is actually very, very similar. And most games will actually make you go through this process over and over again as you go through it. Some games say, like single-player first-person shooters, maybe there's not that much exploration through there. Like, you know, your question is, there's a guy with a gun in his hand running at me, how do I kill him? Your hypothesis is, shoot him in the head. Your testing is, shoot him in the head, and the answer is, he got shot in the head, he's dead. That's good. Something like Ocarina of Time, or you know, one of those real classic games that's awesome, will do a lot more with that. It'll give you a lot more items, more enemies, more environments that you kind of have to explore and understand the fictional world in much the same way that scientists use experiments and the scientific method to understand the physical world. So it's, yeah, I don't know, I think it's kind of a good way of equating sitting for hours at a time on a couch with, you know, doing science, which is kind of cool. All right, so yeah, next time you are frustrated, by the way, playing a Zelda or whatever, just imagine yourself as like equivalent to a nuclear scientist who's trying to work out a particularly difficult problem, and you can feel better about yourself. All right. So this is a little interlude. So we wanted to get some audience participation, and this is a
Solve that
game.
equation.
This is a game I like to call Pokemon or Physics, wherein the audience members try and discern whether or not this equation is a physics equation or as part of the arcane set of stats and rules that govern Pokemon. So I will ask the audience, do you think this is a Pokemon? So hands up if you think this is a Pokemon equation.
Too many Pokemon players in the audience, clearly.
So like roughly 2/3. Okay, who thinks this is a physics equation? We've got a savvy audience. Yeah, so that's actually a Pokemon equation.
Can anyone tell you what it is?
No, yeah, you can tell. You tell.
Can anyone?
Can anyone tell us? Can anyone tell us what that is? Sorry?
No, it's not effort values, but good try. Yeah? Yeah, it's the catch rate.
Catch rate. So it's whether or not something's going to pop out. All right, round 2. All right, the people who got the first one wrong, this is your redemption. Well,
I told you not to press that button!
sorry, experimenting. Okay. Yep. Okay, so again, hands up if you think this is a Pokemon problem. No? Pokemon equation? That's like 1/3. Okay, who thinks it is a physics problem? Quite a few more, okay. It is a Pokemon equation. This is actually the, oh no, actually, sorry, does anyone know this one? Shiny encounter? Sorry, shiny encounter? No, sorry, was it?
Nope.
No.
Wake up from the sleep.
Nope.
No, that's a good one though. Wow, there are so many stats that I didn't even know about. I didn't even look into that. All right. So which one was it?
That one is the stats boost from the erratic nature type.
Oh yeah, getting experience from an erratic nature type. That's how they work that out. Okay, final chance at redemption. Last one. Deceptively simple. So who thinks this is a Pokemon equation?
You scared them off.
Yeah. They got this nailed. Yeah. So who thinks it's a physics? It's a physics. Sorry. That's done.
That's one of the new Pokemon from the reboot.
Yeah. This is
They're running out of animals to rip off.
this is Pokemon biology. All right. So you may kind of feel that there's no kind of like it's nice to think like you're thinking like a scientist, but you may feel there's no real practical application to going through that constant like logical loop of question. Besides getting to the end of the game, that's kind of cool. But besides that, it is kind of hard to find examples where scientists have kind of made use of the way that gamers can think and the way that gamers can make logical leaps and make these intuitive leaps towards finding the answers to problems. But there are some examples, and the example that I'm going to be talking about today is called protein folding. Does anyone know what protein folding is? Freaking everyone! Wow. This is the best crowd. Okay, so brief explanation. So protein folding is essentially the way in which researchers figure out the structures of proteins. Proteins they do a heap of stuff in our bodies. They can be defenders, they can be messengers between different chemicals, they can be structures to our cellular kind of bits. They're all made out of the same stuff. They're called amino acids. I've got an example of one there, yep. That's lysine, that's an amino acid. But it's the way, so they're all built out of the same building blocks, but it's the way that these building blocks kind of snip together and fold in on themselves and origami themselves that actually determines what function they play in the body, hence protein folding. The thing that we kind of want to do is work out not only how they fold, but how they misfold as well. Like there's kind of a whole range of diseases like Huntington's, I think it was Huntington's, yes. Huntington's, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and some cancers which actually result from proteins misfolding. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to figure out the structure of these things directly, so we have to use things like computer simulations in order to figure those out. I won't go too far into that. In fact, I won't go into that at all today about how to actually do the computer simulations, but suffice to say that they're very computationally expensive. If anyone's heard of IVEC, which is like a huge supercomputer facility in WA, there's the NCI, I think, is the one over here. They run like banks and banks and banks of processors and stuff to run these things. Like this is serious processing power that you need in order to elucidate protein folding. This is mainly because it's kind of hard to design a computer to do those same logical leaps and intuitive leaps that you gamers do pretty much on a daily basis. However, thankfully, some researchers at the University of Washington, biochemistry place, Department of Biochemistry, sorry, and the Center for Game Science figured out how to harness that. And they did that by designing a game called Fold It. Now, who has played Fold It? Yes.
Wowee.
That's good. That's a good percentage. So this is just a video that'll play for the rest of my talk of me going like a nunce through the tutorial. It's so painful. Going through the tutorial, so it kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. Fold It basically gives you a few rules. It gives you some tools that you can use to manipulate amino acids and proteins. And it tells you to basically make it the best structure that you can by doing, like, making sure that you've got the right orientation of amino acids, the right orientation of proteins. It starts out really simple like that one, which took me an embarrassingly long time to do. But it kind of gets more complicated until you're using kind of these rubber banding to make sure that you've got hydrogen bonding lining up between protein sheets and all this kind of stuff. And so by doing this, you can see your score up the top there. Ooh, I can use the pointer. You can see your score up there. In the tutorial, it's just you have to get to that score. But in sort of the real problems that they give you, that are the things that they're kind of working on at the moment, it's just like you've got X score. And if you get the highest score, or a higher score, you pass it on to the researchers automatically. And then they can use that as a starting point to plug into their like highly awesome simulations. So yeah, you can see it gets pretty complicated pretty quick. So it's kind of like any kind of high score table. So it's like Spelunky or Flappy Bird or whatever, except instead of running through caves really fast or flying through pipes, you are doing science and curing cancer, which is really cool. And kind of makes all those speed runs that you do through Super Meat Boy seem kind of pointless in comparison. That's a lie. I love Super Meat Boy. I don't regret anything.
Phil, how far through Super Meat Boy have you gotten?
I'm glad that you asked that, Tim. I'm a golden god. Yeah, I 100% did it. It's like my proudest gaming achievement. All right. No. All right. So before I wrap up, so just to prove that this is a real-world application, because it's still just kind of a game, right? Just to prove that this stuff is real and it provides real solutions to things. In 2011, and since 2011, but the big thing was in 2011, there were two groups, or guilds, if you will, of players of Fold It that banded together to work on these problems. And they were called the Contenders and Void Crushers, cool names. And they managed to narrow down a structure that had been flummoxing researchers for 10 years, and they managed to nail that down in 3 weeks. That's pretty insane. Not only that, they got a nature paper out of it. And I don't know how, like, I don't know whether or not people know the context of that. There were a couple of woos from the side. That's good. So Nature is one of the top 2 scientific journals in the world. If you get a Nature paper, it's awesome. You are like top shelf stuff. You are hitting #1 on the charts. You are featured item on Steam Store. Like you are, yeah, they know that one. Yeah, it is good stuff. Not only that, but since then, they've actually got an additional 2 Nature papers. So 3 Nature papers in a lifetime is pretty damn good. And these guys have got it by playing a video game. So, you know, it kind of reinforces the fact that whereas you may think that just sitting down playing games, you're just kind of doing something that you enjoy, you're actually doing something that is really hard and requires a lot of effort and a lot of ability in order to complete games. So I guess to wind my thing up, because I'm just remember, when you are sitting to play a game, you're pretty much just a scientific instrument and maybe a bachelor's degree away from being a full-on researcher in the scientific community. So yeah, that's it from me. Over to Tim.
Okay, well,
Are you on?
am I on? No. Have I actually turned myself off? Ooh, hello. Yeah, there we go.
Very good.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty awesome stuff.
Wait till you hear this.
Yeah, that was fine or cool or whatever. So the point is that we now can sort of see that games and science are not really all that different from one another, which is kind of a cool thing to realize. So what we started to do is we started to draw these parallels further and say, just how much science do we see in video games? And how far can video games reach into science? And how accurate can some of these video games get? And more importantly, outside of a couple of Nature publications, because whatever, I mean, I don't have one, but I'm not bitter. Does it even matter? And I mean, so spoiler alert, yes. Just up here, I've thrown the...
Oh, Tim. It's all right.
Thank you.
Gravity.
It's gravity.
Just
It's
showing
all
that.
about...
That was all planned.
Yeah.
Totally.
So one of my favorite quotes from Arthur C. Clarke, which is essentially that a wise man once said that all of human activity is a form of play. And the highest form of play is the search for truth, beauty, and love, which I thought was a really cool little quote that sums everything together, because every part of learning, every experience that you have is really a form of play in a way. It's all about interacting with your environment in a way and then seeing how the environment interacts back with you, learning from it, and iterating on the process. So, a bit of my background before I start. Before I moved not here to Sydney, but up to Sydney, and then I guess came down to Melbourne for PAX, I worked at the largest planetarium in the Southern Hemisphere, and one of the most technologically advanced planetariums in the world. And hands up if you knew that was in Perth. Yeah, like the people that know me. So, I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's like, whoa, you know, he's got memes and everything. He has his own planetarium, but, you know, we actually have some of the best software in the world, and it's right up there alongside Hayden Planetarium. So we're pretty proud of that. And I was the resident astronomer at the planetarium for 4 years. It was a job that I loved, and I was absolutely honored to hold that position for so long. But when someone gives you an 18-meter projection system, a huge 18-meter domed screen, and 6 DLP projectors, and a bank of supercomputers to run it, what's the very first thing you do? You play games on it. Right? And for me, my boss isn't here, so I can say that. And hopefully no one knows my boss, who I use, because it doesn't matter, because I don't work there anymore. It was...
Yeah, screw that guy.
It was Homeworld, right? Homeworld 2 specifically. Now, if you can imagine Homeworld 2 on an 18-meter screen that goes all the way around you, that is mental. But then, so I stopped playing games because I had to do some real work. And then I realized that the controls of the planetarium are actually strikingly similar to the controls for Homeworld. There are no actual spaceships in the planetarium, but the navigation controls are all the same. And so after sort of, a couple of times, maybe on Sundays, playing Homeworld when the planetarium was empty, and one time when there was a person in it. But they'd seen the show before and they were like, show me something new. I'm like, okay. This is a story about the Higarans fleeing there. So I started to realize, because the controls are so similar, I started to use the planetarium as if it was a spaceship, which is different. When your audience comes in and they're expecting to get a tour of the night sky, and you say, all right, everyone buckle in, because we are going to go to Alpha Centauri today, or we're going to go right out to the edge of the universe. You start doing these amazing presentations that don't feel like science anymore. They start feeling like science fiction. And the less it felt like science, the more I started incorporating things that weren't exactly science. For example, I might say, here is, we're going out of our solar system. We've gone past all the regular planets, and now we're going past Pluto, which is no longer a planet. And no, don't. Pluto was a dick, and he knows what he did. So this is the ex-planet Pluto, and orbiting around it, you can see one of the co-orbital bodies of Pluto, the moon Charon, which was later discovered to be a frozen mass relay in the year 2149. And sometimes people would pick up on that. Sometimes they wouldn't. They go, oh, that's very interesting. And so I'd start to get cheeky, and I'd see how many things I could put into a show, and before they started to pick up that I was bollocksing them, essentially. But the more you do that, again, the more you incorporate these scientific things in games and the games things in science, the more real they both start to feel. So a quick little thing that I was going to do for you now. This is a piece of software called Stellarium. It's free on the internet. You can download it. You can perform your own little planetarium shows for your cats. And it's great. I don't have cats.
Tim, just tell them not to use the red laser pointer.
Yeah, don't use the laser pointer because the cats will go mental. So this is actually the sky right now. But it's daytime, so we can't see anything, obviously. So we have to wait until the sun goes down. So I'm going to fast forward time now until about 9:30 tonight. And this is, quite literally, the sky you will see tonight here in Melbourne, outside the convention centre at 9:30. We've got things like, for example, the moon, you can see. You've got some bright stars that you might recognise. Now, obviously, this isn't what the sky looks like from Melbourne because you can see stars, right? Although Melbourne's better than a lot of places in the world, so it's not so bad. So what we're going to do is, so here's the Southern Cross. You can see down, oh, it's over there now. Come back, me from the past. So we're going to increase the light pollution now to make it a bit more realistic as to what you will see here in Melbourne. And now it looks like this. So we can see a handful of stars. We can see the moon way up there. You can see Mars over here. Maybe a bit less. Obviously, I didn't like that one. You can see Mars. You can see this down here is Antares. Antares is a very red planet that's commonly mistaken for Mars. That's why it's called Antares, which means anti-Aries, the opposite of Mars. Very clever. So bringing up the constellations, we can see, you might recognize some of them. Like I said, the Southern Cross down here and the two pointer stars, also known as Rigel, Kent, Hadar, as everyone knows. And as we keep going east, we see this big constellation over here called Eridanus. It's this big windy one that it's kind of a little hard to see. But this star here is called Epsilon Eridanus. And Epsilon Eridanus is definitely visible tonight. You can see it from Melbourne. And Epsilon Eridanus is really interesting. It's a K-class star. It's similar to our own, not quite. It has a similar habitable zone. And inside that habitable zone is a planet called Reach. So the point is that Reach is set on a real star with realistic, if you actually go into the lore, it's actually situated in the green band of that star. And you can go outside tonight and look at it and be like, oh, that's where Reach is. And it is still there because the Covenant don't glass it for another 300, 400 years. So we're pretty much fine. So that's some cool stuff. And it starts to make it feel a lot more tangible. If you can point out and say to your friends, like, hey, did you know that's where Reach is, I think? The panel was a while ago. I'm just going to, yeah, that was definitely the one. So, and that leads me on to one of my next favorite things, and that is Mass Effect. Yeah. So, Mass Effect is an amazing game, and one of the reasons it is so amazing is that the game has a lot of science in it, and I mean like real science.
Biotics is the ability of rare individuals to manipulate element zero.
So the science is really cool in this game, and I think the science is actually one of the reasons that the game sold so well. I mean, 10 million physical copies alone, not counting Origin, because no one counts Origin. So I like to think that it's not the epic storytelling, which is epic, and it's not the amazing characterization, and it's not the beautiful presentation, and it's not Liara Sioni, who I totally don't have a crush on. And it's the science of the game that makes it so interesting. So one of the really interesting things is this thing right here. This is the SR2 Normandy, sporting its Alliance colors from the third game. And you'll notice that this is just a loading screen. This flickers on for half a second if you've got a half-decent computer. I actually had to virtualize my computer to make it really bad, to make the graphic last this long to record it. So that's fun. But what's happening on the screen now isn't just chance, and it's not just some graphic artist who's going, sure, put some blue stuff here, some lights that go whoosh. Everything here is actually, it's there for a reason. So the front of the ship, you'll notice, is blue, and all the light coming in the front is blue, and the back of it is all red. That's a physical phenomenon called Doppler shifting. And if you read the entry on Doppler shifting in the game, so you can go into the codex and you can read about the FTL appearance, and it even goes so far as to say that the light at the front is so far Doppler shifted because they're talking about these relativistic speeds, so we're talking about really, really fast speeds, that light doesn't just become blue, but the cosmic microwave background, which is normally far deep in the infrared, is actually visible. It's so blue shifted it becomes visible in the visible spectrum. And then behind you, if you look behind you, you can see high-energy gamma rays and quasars and pulsars flashing behind you. So that was all real stuff. I mean, it's still artistically rendered, but it's all there for a reason. And it's that extra bit of depth that really makes the game start to shine. And I think that's one of the really important parts of the game that makes you feel like you're actually immersed in the world. So let's move out of the Mass Effect universe for a brief second before we get to the end of the third game, because I know that causes contention among people. I loved it, all right? Thank you. There are like 12 other people who also like the ending. That's good to know. So what about if we take things back down to something that we can actually interact with and relate to on a personal level, all right? You've all been going around the convention center. That's something we can relate to. We can't relate to traveling in space because right? I mean, most of us haven't done it, unless there's some abductees here. But we have moved around the convention center. But what if you could arbitrarily connect two places in the convention center and just travel between them at will? That's Portal.
Spectacular. You appear to understand how a portal affects forward momentum, or to be more precise, how it does not.
Sorry, just the game's a little weird radio playing in the background.
Momentum, a function of mass and velocity, is conserved between portals. In layman's terms, speedy thing goes in, speedy thing comes out.
And like, wow, but that one quote, that speedy thing goes in, speedy thing comes out, is Newton's first law, which I believe is one of the hardest things to teach at an elementary physics level. Megan will disagree. She'll explain why she disagrees later. But I think that the first law of momentum is the hardest part to teach. The notion that momentum is conserved when you go through portals is actually a really interesting physical concept, and it makes the entire game,
to understand how a portal affects forward momentum.
But what if we take physics
how it does not.
and throw it out the window? What if we tried to play a game where nothing behaved as we expected. Some of you might have played this game. Now, if you haven't played this game, you need to. It's called Antichamber. It was actually here at PAX last year, and it was made by Alexander Bruce, I think, which is one of the most Australian names ever. And Alexander Bruce has made a game where he utilized what we call non-Euclidean geometry. And that means that... What? What just happened? And then, oh, it's a dead end. Let's turn around and go back the way we came. Oh. This is what non-Euclidean geometry is. When we walk, we expect to go one place, and then we turn around, we don't expect to go back. With non-Euclidean geometry, that doesn't necessarily happen. And so if anyone can look at what's happening in this video and say, oh yeah, I get that, you're lying. You're lying to me, and you're lying to yourself. So that's really high concept stuff. It's really interesting physics, but it's being presented in a format that literally everyone here is capable of doing, and maybe not completing. I haven't finished it because it is balls hard. But I've got a good chunk through it, maybe 80%. But there is another game that utilizes even more interesting physics, and it is one of the most physically accurate games on the market right now. And hopefully, at least all of you have played it at this point. And it's Kerbal Space Program. What is happening in Kerbal Space Program is incredibly complex. And it's not just complex, but it's also really, again, high-level physics. This stuff here, where you're doing the orbital maneuvers, that is really counterintuitive stuff to teach people. And I myself, after 10 years of university, played Kerbal Space Program and went, oh, crap, that's how that works. That makes so much more sense now. Why didn't they just tell me that? Where were the little green aliens in my undergrad? So now I take Kerbal Space Program into high schools and I bring it into the classroom and say, hey, there's this cool game. They're like, yeah, we know. It's fine. Have you been to Duna? I'm like, well, I've been around Duna. Why, have you been to? They're like, yeah, we've been to Duna. All right, kids these days. But they didn't know how to dock, and I did feel good about that because I can dock. So suck on that, you 7-year-old bastard. But it is crazy. At least half, if not 2/3 of the kids are already playing Kerbal Space Program, which is teaching concepts that are easily university level in sort of scope. So again, really, really impressive stuff. The very final thing that I want to talk about is where this is all heading. So I play a lot of space games. I'm a bit of a space nerd. For me, it all started off with Star Fox on the Super Nintendo, which was an amazing game, and then from there moving on to the Wing Commander series, and then X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, which prompted me to buy my first joystick, which I still use and own today. It's a Microsoft Sidewinder, and she's been with me for, no, it's okay. It's not that weird. It's not like me and Liara. It's a joystick. I get that's weird. And while they're great games in their own right, there's actually bugger all physics going on here. They're awesome games, but what's happening on the screen is entirely arbitrary. The turn rate is just a number in a file in a config part of the game that says the ship can turn at 3 turn units per time piece. Like, there's nothing real happening here. But recently, we've started to see this trend of different physical games starting to come through. And the one that's really got me excited is this one. Now, hopefully, at least some people here know what I'm talking about. A couple of people I've heard of, yes. So this is Star Citizen. And Star Citizen was, if you've heard about it, the kick-funded project with Chris Roberts, the guy that made the Wing Commander series that I fell in love with so long ago. He's making this new game along with people. He's hired like 280 people now. 280. They've kickstarted over $58 million. I haven't looked this morning because the Herald came on sale yesterday.
when I do this, it doesn't work. But it turns out that's what actually happened. It was so physically accurate that no one could play it. So they had to completely rewrite the physics system and the control system such that people don't need a degree in astronautical engineering and flying space shuttles to actually get in the game and play it themselves. So that is where the next generation of games is coming from. These super high, incredibly realistic physics simulations that allow us to play games in ways that we simply haven't done before. But to do that, we need kids who understand how to play these games. And fortunately, we've got Megan, who is teaching the next generation of gamers. And she's going to talk to us a little bit now about her experience doing that.
All right. My name's Megan, working in high school, and when I heard Phil say his bit about his first gaming experience, I had to think back to mine. And it involved me sitting in my cousin's lounge room, gripping onto a NES controller with the edges digging into my palms while trying to pass the diabolical World 1-1 on Mario Brothers on the NES. So I started there on the console and sort of play a bit of everything. And when I started teaching, I wanted to bring that into my classroom. And like Phil said, video games have a lot in common with science, and for me as a science teacher, that was great. And they actually are designed to incorporate good learning principles into the gameplay. So Phil mentioned Ocarina of Time, which is a fantastic example. Has anyone played Ocarina? Yeah. That's a really good example of the good learning principles. A few of the things that I'm talking about include well-ordered problems. Often what you learn in the first problem is utilised in future problems, but they get progressively harder and harder. They're always just at the edge of your ability, so they're challenging, but still doable. If it was impossible, no one would play. They provide you with information just in time for you to be able to solve that next problem, or on demand for like Tim's codex in Mass Effect. And they lower the level or the consequence of failure so that you're more likely to take risks. And that's when you die and start again. I die a lot. So I started using video games last year, and I started with a few free video games, just in case I failed. So the cost of failure was very low. And my aim was to encourage my students to be more creative problem solvers rather than just being able to recite a bunch of facts and do some algebra and think that that's physics. So I started off with using STEAM for Schools, which, if you haven't heard, is available to educational institutions. It has 2 games available for free at the moment. The first one is this one, Universe Sandbox. So this one models a bunch of different things. You can do the universe, the Milky Way. This is our solar system. And one of our topics was learning about the solar system and sort of the Big Bang and how the universe began. So we played this, or I let the students play with this simulation and asked them to have a play and see what happened when they messed with the solar system. So obviously you can't do that in real life, and this gives you an experience. Well, you could try, but it costs a lot of money. So this is Earth, and as you can see, it's a bit hard to make out, but there's some stats on the right, and they're real statistics about all the planets in the solar system. So you can use them in your lessons and help kids learn about all the planets. And what we're going to do in this very short clip is add in the rings of Saturn around the Earth to see what happens. So Universe Sandbox is great because it is basically a sandbox with a universe in it, and you can play with it and do things to it. And in a minute, we'll pull up the menu. And the kids quickly found out how to put in tennis balls and basketball, giant-sized basketball. I don't know. I didn't even know they were in there. So you can see we've paused it at the moment, but when we press play, something happens that you might not expect.
Where did they go?
what's going on here?
Well, what's happening there is that the Earth just doesn't have the mass to hold on to a ring system, and Saturn is very heavy, or it's very heavy compared to us. So what's happened is we had a ring system around the Earth, and then the Sun went, that's mine now.
So you can see it's a much more interactive way to do a lesson rather than going, yes, the sun comes first, then, what was it again? Anyway, this is much more fun for me, much more fun for them. I then moved on to the second game in the Steam for Schools library, which is Portal 2. Difference between Portal 1 and Portal 2 is that Portal 2 has this great community feature where you can make your own levels, obviously, and you can try solving other people's levels. So after introducing the students in how to play Portal, I got them making their own puzzle rooms to help them. We were looking at physics, so we were looking at motion, velocity, acceleration, like the conservation of momentum, all sorts of different things, and just playing with the features that are there. I did set a challenge to my students. I said at any time in the year, if you can make a puzzle room I can't solve in under 5 minutes, I'll give you a prize, and no one claimed the prize. So I was quite proud of that. But just watching them think, in their head, they had a way that you were meant to solve their problem, but then they would do things like leave all the walls white, so you could just portal over to fix it. So it did really get them thinking outside the box and thinking in a different way that they don't do. And actually having them set the problems rather than solving them is also absolutely fantastic. And at first they sort of went, what has this got to do with physics? And I kind of said, everything. Yeah, so that was great fun. The next one I tried, hopefully, how do I pause that? Oh, there we go, perfect. All right, so the next game I tried, also available for free to educational institutions, and I first tried this in alpha mode, is Toilet Maker, which is basically the current day Incredible machine made by the same people. And it's very cheap, and you can get it on Steam, and then you're releasing a standalone PC version as well. So I use Contraption Maker with some younger students to look at energy transfers and transformation. So we had to look at what different types of energy were we seeing, how are they being transferred between different objects, or maybe even transformed into different types of energy. Again, with this game, it's a great community feature where you can download other people's levels, you can make levels yourself and put them up and have other people play your levels. And the students would just come up with the craziest way to solve problems that I would never even think of. And the current Contraption Maker actually has a video of their official solution, but you can also submit your own solutions, and it's just so interesting to see the wide variety of ways you can solve one problem. And as you can see, there's lots of different things you can do. You've got electricity with the light bulb, you've got magnifying glass, there's even lasers now, dogs, hamsters in cages, all sorts of things. So it's absolutely fantastic game, and yeah, again, free for educational institutions, so I jumped on that. The next one, which I've been using a lot to teach Newton's laws, which is very simple and elegant, but it's sort of a bit deceiving in that it is so simple but has a lot to it, is Osmos. So I get my students to download the free demo, and a lot of them then go on to buy the Android or iPad version. The PC version is only $10, and the apps are about $5. So as you can see, that was just Newton's third law. He liked to write things in Latin so the plebs couldn't read it. Hands up, does anyone remember any of Newton's laws? Probably a lot of people. Keep your hands up. Do you actually understand Newton's laws? Hands up. Keep your hands up if you understand and you're not a science person. Yeah. Okay. My point is, when you're trying to teach this to a 15-year-old who says, what the hell does that have to do with my life? They don't even work on Earth. It sort of goes against everything that you've experienced. It's really hard to convince them that, yes, these laws are true and they work. So we played this game, and the first one, Newton's third law, is the every action has an equal and opposite reaction, which everyone's pretty much the only one everyone memorises, is actually, I think, the most difficult one to understand.
It's totally not.
But in this game, that is how you move around. You have to eject motes behind you in order to move forwards. And on Earth, that just kind of doesn't really work because friction ends up slowing you down and stopping you, and students can't see friction, so they just think, oh no, everything stops. What are you talking about? Newton's first law basically says everything keeps doing what it's already doing unless something comes along and messes with it, so I think that's easy. And you can see, if you just let that go, it will keep doing what it's doing unless it bumps into a wall or hits another mote. And the second law just says, if something does come to mess with you, this is what's going to happen based on your mass and the force and the acceleration. So we've been using that a lot, or I've been getting the kids to use that a lot to introduce them to Newton's three laws. And they get a lot of aha moments when playing this game that I just can't get through other experiments in the classroom. So the big one that was my big experiment this year, which the school actually gave me money to do, I was a bit scared with $700.
As a scientist, we don't normally see that much money.
As a teacher, even less. Even less. We bought, or the school bought, 2 class sets of Minecraft EDU. It's an educational version which has some extra features in it, basically just modded for the classroom. So I was teaching earth science, and I thought, rocks and mining, Minecraft, rocks and mining, goes together. So this is one of the first activities the students did. We were learning about definitions. So again, rather than just memorising stuff, I got them to mine and collect a bunch of blocks and sort them out into the categories rock, ore, mineral, and none of the above. So they had to, I gave them some chests, and they had to go collect and then come back and put them in there as a pair, and then go and look at another pair's classification and compare that to their own, and then have a big discussion about why'd you put that there, or I put it there because that's what a rock is, and things like that. So getting them to apply their knowledge to a situation rather than just going, oh yeah, a rock is state sentence from Wikipedia here, which happens a lot. We would have the whole class in the world at the same time, which was fantastic, and just the collaboration happening naturally between students without me having to prompt was beyond what I expected. Another activity I did, and maybe someone can, I quizzed Tim and Phil and they couldn't answer me. We were looking at the 3 types of rock and the rock cycle and where they're found in nature. So the task I set my students was, I gave them a digital worksheet. I said, okay, you've got to go take, like a scavenger hunt, take photos or screenshots at all these different places where you would find this type of rock. So the first one was, go find a place where you'd find an extrusive igneous rock. Anyone? Yeah, so students, my students went and found some lava above ground and took a photo. Then asked them to find an intrusive igneous rock. Again, basically the same thing, except underground. So that was one of the simple tasks we did, and I tried to use short and sweet tasks to start with because I'm still learning, and cost of failure, quite low, 1 lesson down the drain rather than a whole term. So that's the sort of things I was doing in Minecraft. There are a lot of other teachers doing a lot of other fantastic, more involved things out there as well. Some of the challenges I faced, which I didn't expect, was a lot of my students hadn't played Minecraft before. So I had about 44, 45 students who I did this experiment with, and 18 had never played before. Half of them said they did not play PC or console games, they only played mobile games. And this is the sort of thing I had to deal with.
Okay, I'm just going to have a look around and let's see what I find. I fell down a hole. I keep falling down the hole. That's cool. Whoa. Oh my god. So I should come down here momentarily. I'm stuck in a hole because I can't butterfly.
Right, mix it up. Next one was things
Laura,
like
don't
this.
steal my stuff.
I gave them a bit.
What category were you thinking of putting them in?
Grace! She's like taking my test. Grace?
And then things like this, when I step out of the room for 2 minutes, I don't know if you can see the way it says, if that's really how you feel, like your face every time I have to see it. I also made the mistake of leaving it on creative mode where they found splash potions, so that was half a lesson down the drain. But the EDU mode does come with extra teacher controls. I can freeze students, I can mute students, I can give them items, I can teleport them places. It's just a lot more, it's fantastic, basically. And the last thing I wanted to show you was, again, something unexpected. After I finished using Minecraft in the classroom, we finished Earth Science, went into the library one lunchtime, a bunch of girls on their laptops from my classes playing, and other classes playing Minecraft. They made this together with, I didn't even know, they set up their own server and created a replica of Hogwarts with the... Last one. This girl made this by herself and came to show me because she knows I like Doctor Who, and she made it at home all by herself. And that's a TARDIS in the background, giant TARDIS. Anyway, she took me on a tour of her TARDIS. It was wonderful. Look, we're out of time, but...
One more.
There we go. We'll hang around for a little while if you want to come and chat to us. We were going to have a Q&A, but...
We talked too long.
We had too many things.
We're also putting up what has been said as well on the... so Phil and I have a podcast called Tim and Phil.
Girls weren't invited, clearly.
So it's a gaming podcast. You can find us at timandphil.com or on YouTube for Tim and Phil. This will be up there. There's other things up there as well if you like things like Kerbal Space Program, Minecraft, Space Game, Star Citizen, etc., etc., etc. And if you do have any questions, you can always grab us on any of our Twitter handles as well, and we are more than happy to talk to anyone at any time, forever.
Thank you
Thank you very much for coming.